Hello wonderful people at the internet. Today I'm going to be reviewing The Baptism of Fire, the third Witcher novel by Andrzej Sapkowski. So without any further ado, let's get into it. Okay, so we're just going to get this out of the way right now. I really like this book, and I want to try and present my thoughts to you as clearly and eloquently as possible, but it's probably not going to turn out that way. But yeah, I'll do my best to present to you how I'm feeling. Now, spoilers for this book. Now, the season 3 of The Witcher is actually coming out, the first instalment of it anyway, is coming out tomorrow, and this takes place after what they're adapting in the Netflix show. So if you're going to watch the Netflix show and don't want to get spoiled, if you know the whole drill, if you don't want to be spoiled for the book then or the show, don't click off now, come back later if you want to, and then we'll get into why I love this book. So this book picks up pretty much where The Time of Contempt ended, with Geralt leaving Brokilon Forest with his best friend Dandelion in pursuit of his daughter Ciri, because they believe she is in Nilfgaard, where she has been abducted and taken to marry the Nilfgaardian Emperor. She's not there, and they don't realise that until like 3/4 of the way through this book. But that's where they're going. That's what this book is. It's these two characters going off to find Ciri, and along the way they assemble their own little fellowship, and it's wonderful. It's not what I was expecting. I thought it was just going to be Geralt and Dandelion, and don't get me wrong, I love Geralt and I love Dandelion, but these new people that rocked up, I loved just as much, if not more, than those two characters, so that was a welcome surprise for me. Alongside those two plot lines, there is Ciri, because she, as I said, is not in Nilfgaard. She's in fact travelling with this group of young bandits called the Rats, and it's about her experience there. She kind of discovers a darker side of herself that enjoys murder and violence and exploring that. There wasn't much of her in this, but that's where she kind of was. And then there was Yennefer as well, who didn't turn up until the end of the book, pretty much, who was turned into a jade statuette at the end, or near the middle of Time of Contempt, when there was the Faned coup, and now she's been released and now forced to join a group of sorceresses who have been formed in the book called the Lodge of Sorceresses, who are basically, they've assembled themselves and they've gone, right, we're going to start running this place in the interest of magic. So they're going to influence politics and things like that, so that the best outcome for magic and its practice occurs. And so that's all really cool. That's what's going on. Let's get into what I liked. So I did mention that I liked the new characters in this story, and believe me, I knew that there were two of these characters were going to be in this book. I knew that Zoltan Chive, who is a dwarf, and I love dwarves and fantasy, I love Gimli. This guy is basically Gimli, but also kind of more complex, which I'll get into in a minute. And then there's Regis, who is a hire vampire and a barber surgeon who doesn't drink blood. And I liked him in The Witcher 3. I was like, oh, this guy's nice, I like him a lot. And then he was in the books, and I was like, oh my god, I love this man. It's hard to put my finger on. He's just so dry and clever and witty and kind, so kind. I love reading him, and whenever he's in a scene, apart from one, which I'll get into when Andrew Garfield gets turned onto his negative side, I was just like, I like this because you're here. It was just so good. But the two characters I didn't know were going to be there were Cahir, who is the Nilfgaardian. Technically, Cahir isn't a Nilfgaardian, but he's from Vicavaro, but we're gonna ignore that. He kidnapped Ciri all the way back in like the Sword of Destiny, but he didn't do much in this book, although I did like him. It was Milva, who is a archer who works with the Dryads in Brokilon, and I did not know this character before I read this book, and I did not know she was going to be in this book. It started from her viewpoint, and I expected it to be kind of like Sapkowski occasionally does, where he starts the book with a random viewpoint and they don't turn up for the rest of the book, like Applegat in the previous book, who got shot after Sapkowski communicated everything he needed to with him. But Milva stuck around, and I grew to love her so much. She is such a great character, and she got, so many terrible things happened to her towards the end of the book, and it was just, I love Milva. She's brilliant, and I believe she's going to be in part 2 of The Witcher Season 3, so I'm just like, damn, that's great. And right, basically, I like these new characters a lot. Now, I want to touch on something that I've been thinking about while I was reading this book. It's Sapkowski's writing, which I think I've only just come to understand and kind of enjoy. So I might actually have to reread these at some point, but no problems with that. Sapkowski writes in a way that is very flowy. His writing flows. Each plot event just goes from one to the other seamlessly, and it's so interesting how it happens. There are scenes where it's like, you know, this is just what's happening. You know, you don't really understand why the scene is there, and then it happens, and so many different things will come out of the scene, and you're like, oh, that's why. And it's hard to put my finger on. It just feels like these are real people going through real places, and these are things that are happening to them, and the story's coming out of it, and it's done perfectly. And I just love every little detour and seeing what character or plot thing that it's going to reveal. It is just wonderful. So many things, like they'll go this way and then it'll get blocked, and then that leads them somewhere else, and you learn something from that, and it's just, it's amazing. It's incredible. I was going to say how the new characters were quite complex. Now, Zoltan, what came across as this guy who's like, he wants to help people. You know, one of the monologues he had was, I want to help people, but I've realised that I can only help myself and the people around me, so that's what I try to do, and that was him justifying stealing food from people. And later on it turns out that this wagon they were putting with them, this is him and his company, throughout the portion of the book where he was with the travelling with the Witcher and his group before they got separated, was actually full of stolen goods, which they stole from someone and possibly murdered. And then Zoltan's like, am I a bad person? And Geralt's like, no, because that was one time. And it was just like, it's so interesting how these characters, like, you know, that didn't have to be there, but it adds so many layers to Zoltan as a person, and I was just like, that's great. And then there was Milva, who for this whole book I was just enjoying as, you know, the spunky, competent, you know, character that she was. And then, but there were like hints of her being sad, like she started crying at one point and she's throwing up a lot. And I did spoil myself, I knew she was pregnant at one point, but then she's like, I'm pregnant, and she wants to get an abortion. The scene where Geralt's talking to her about her pregnancy and she breaks down and starts crying, and then she goes, Geralt, why are you crying? And he goes, don't worry, just a memory. And he's thinking about Ciri when he first got her and she'd cry, and it's just like, he just misses, it's so good. For extreme events, she decides to keep the baby, and then she has a miscarriage, and it was just like, oh my god, give the girl a break. It was just, I think I'm going to read Tower of Swallows immediately now. I did intend to read Discord books in between every book that I read, but I don't want to leave a gap here, because I want to know if she's okay, so I'm just going to read Tower of Swallows flat out, I think. But it was just character work, amazing, plot, amazing. I loved every single thing in this book. I loved seeing where it was going, where I was being led. There were so many cheering moments, like Yennefer escaping from Monte Clavo because we're using an oyster, and it takes her to the ocean, and she plummets. It's amazing. This book was really well done, and I think it's definitely where I've started to appreciate how Sapkowski writes the most. So yeah, I loved this book, but I'm going to stop gushing about all the great things in this book, of which there were many, many good things, and I could talk for a very long time. I'm going to flip Andrew Garfield over, and I've got a new way of doing this now. So if you could see, this was meant to be a thing that was going to hold my phone, and I was going to video with it. But it doesn't hold my phone, because my phone's too heavy. So now I'm using it to hold Andrew Garfield, and he's probably going to fall off now I've turned him over, knowing my luck, but we'll try and stick him back on without causing any disruption. No, okay. So there were specifically two things that I did not like about this book. One is the scene that I mentioned about Regis, which is where he is sitting there. This is the half vampire. Not half vampire. Where did that come from? He's a higher vampire. I've been watching a show called Castlevania, in which one of the main characters is a half vampire, and I think that's my problem. But he doesn't drink blood anymore, and in The Witcher, blood is like alcohol. And when he's explaining it, it became the parallel between the real world and this being, you know, fantasy completely disappeared. This was clearly an allegory for drinking, and it wasn't very subtle, and it came across as kind of stupid. He was like, you know, I was nervous with the ladies until I drunk some stuff, and I flew under the influence, and I was like, man, this is, I don't know, it just didn't seem very subtle. It was a bit on the nose, but it was like one scene, but I just wanted to bring it up because it did stick out to me, and I was like, this is odd, I don't like this. But then it's back to normal. And then there was this big discussion amongst the sorceresses about Ciri and her elder blood and where the elder blood comes from. And in the last book it had been set up that Falca was one of Ciri's ancestors, and that Falca had elder blood, and that Ciri's going to avenge her death. And then in this book it turns out that Ciri is not related to Falca, or she might be, but they say she's not, and that Falca could not have had elder blood. And so I'm just like, okay, it's really does my head in that there's an inconsistency, and I hope it's not a plot hole, and I actually trust Sapkowski enough to believe that in future books it's going to be revealed, but at the moment, I'm just like, oh, I don't get this, and that's kind of a bummer. But those are like two scenes, and two elements of the story that didn't click with. I think everything in this story clicked with me massively, and then the two things I didn't like, I was like, oh, I don't like you. But that's like so small that we're not even going to touch on this anymore, so I'll turn Andrew Garfield back over. I gave this book 5 stars on Goodreads, and I stand by it. This is a 5-star read. I really liked Time of Contempt. Blood of Elves was okay. I probably need to reread it now with my kind of appreciation of how Sapkowski writes now. But Time of Contempt was wonderful, and this was really good as well. The same level of greatness, or if not better, than that one. So yeah, 5-star read. I'm so excited to see all this stuff adapted in the Netflix series. I can't wait to see Regis on the screen. I read somewhere that someone was fan casting of Regis was Peter Capaldi, and I was like, we need this. I need this in my life. I need Peter Capaldi to be my vampire, please. But that's my review of Baptism of Fire. I hope that I portrayed what I was thinking as clearly as possible. So yeah, you could probably expect a review of Tower of Swallows from me soon, because as I said, I'm going to go straight into that, and who knows, maybe I'll read Lady of the Lake, and immediately after that I'll read Weird Sisters. We'll see. But I'm really enjoying this, and I will probably produce a video talking about the Netflix series soon. So thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Have a good one. Bye.